We're live, 8:29, project motivation time. It is the morning motivation. Go get some projects done. Today, we're taking a look at calculating top speed, and actually not just top speed, but excuse me, man, calculating speed in each one of the gears. And this can be important for a lot of guys. And the cool thing is all this math can be used to help you determine lots of things. It can be help determine the shift points for various things in different, if you're running through the gears, what should your shift point be in each gear? What's the mile an hour going to be at each RPM based on your tire size and based on your final drive and based on the specific gear that you're in, because you've got to multiply that by the final drive. It's all really, really cool stuff. I use it all the time, as we talked about before. And you can take a look at this car right here. That's what the thumbnail is. This is a Bonneville car, but all the calculations work equally well for drag racing and road racing, because you'll want to see, a lot of guys are concerned about gear splits and stuff, because that's all very important. You want to make sure that you're in the right RPM range and the right gear versus the mile an hour. So if a guy is road racing, a lot of times they'll use it to figure out, okay, what's going to be the optimum gearing for this track, because I'm going to be going this speed when I'm going through this turn, and I want to exit at this point. Then I want to be in the meaty part of the power curve so that you gear it accordingly. And then for road racing, a lot of times it's going to be a compromise. Well, this will be the best combination of stuff, because we can't, a lot of times can't make it optimum in every gear at every corner, but you can try. And so getting maximum acceleration with the available traction, there's a lot of stuff going on. But for me, basically it was trying to figure out, for Bonneville, life is a little bit easier, because in our case, we don't really care about the mile an hour in each lower gear, because we're just accelerating for this at the limit of traction. We have a loose surface. It's just salt. We have, in this particular car, we had an open differential. So we're only spinning one tire, or only grabbing traction with one tire. The tire is very, very narrow. These are basically the front tires off of a top fuel dragster, because they're rated for the speed that we're running. So they're very, very small. What we were trying to do is not get traction. We're actually trying to reduce rolling resistance. So we want to make the tire as aerodynamic, and the wider the tire is, the more rolling resistance it has, and the harder, or the more power it takes to actually roll that wheel. And so we want to minimize that. Basically, you just kind of want steel wheels that are rolling along and not doing anything and not causing any problems. The problem is that it's hard to put power down, because you're balancing traction versus aero kind of thing. So those are the tires that we use. And then you can adjust the tire size to give you different gearing, because the tire size affects gearing. This is all really, really good stuff. And you can get a simple calculation from lots of places. The Auto Math book is what I use. And to figure out, basic speed versus gearing versus RPM, I use the following formula. So the mile an hour, the speed is equal to, and this is a simple formula, on the top side of the formula, RPM times tire diameter. So whatever your maximum RPM, in our case, for our example, I'm going to use 8,000 RPM. This is a Honda Civic motor. Really, it's more of a custom kind of Integra motor, because in our class that we ran in, which was G at Bonneville, that was slightly above 2 liters, so 2.01 or something. So it was a 2-liter class, 2 liters and less. You can't run anything bigger than that. You could run something smaller than that if you wanted, but most people in that class would run something that's fairly close to the maximum size, because, as we said, in any class, a bigger motor makes more power. So you want to be like kind of right at the limit. And what we did was build a couple of motors. In our case, we ran the 84 millimeter bore, and then combine that with either an 87.2 millimeter stroke, like the GSR stroke, or the 89 millimeter stroke. We use factory cranks on both of these, either the GSR crank or the LS crank, the non-VTEC crank. And both of those worked well. And both of them kept us under our maximum limit. And so don't talk to me about de-stroking it and all that stuff. You want something that's going to be near 2 liters. But I always gave us a little bit of room to overboard if something happened, so that we could so that we could bore it out and fix the motor if that, because you got to think about that stuff. So what we were trying to do is figure out gearing. We know that, and in the beginning, what we wanted to do is run more than 200 miles an hour. So we wanted a 200-mile-an-hour Civic. As it turned out, we went to more than 226 miles an hour before our axle shaft decided to pop out and exit stage right, basically. And I had to pull the chute and save the car. It was getting all wonky. It was an exciting ride. It was fun, but before doing that, what I did is go through a bunch of different transmissions and a bunch of different gearing and a bunch of different tire sizes to figure out how do we get this car to go 200. Because a factory B series like this car was originally a Civic Si. It was a 99 Civic Si. So it came with the B16 and it came with the B16 trans. Well, the gearing that was in the B16 trans would never allow it to go 200. It would have just taken way too much RPM to be able to do that. So what we did was we initially started by, in my math, I started by using the GS non-VTEC Integra transmission, because it did two things. It changed the gear sets in the transmission, and it also changed the final drive. It's pretty easy to swap a final drive, but even putting the final drive in the B16 was a 4.4, and the final drive in the US spec Integra was a 4.26. So we want essentially taller gearing. Even going to the 4.26 in the B16 trans didn't get us what we needed. It wasn't enough of a change. And the nice thing about the Integra transmission, it also had taller fourth and fifth gears. So we had a 0.96 fourth gear and a 0.742 fifth gear. So again, very tall gearing, which helped us. So if you plug this in, RPM times tire diameter divided by the gear ratio, and the gear ratio is another little formula in and of itself. So you can use the gear ratio, the absolute gear ratio. You can use your first, second, third, fourth, fifth gear ratio, and then multiply that times the final drive. So in our case, we'll use fifth gear because it's easier. But what I did was I did the mile an hour at 8,000 RPM for each of the gears in this LS transmission. So we had 0.742, which is fifth gear, times 4.26. And then you multiply that times 336. That way we have our numerator and a denominator. And so you multiply RPM times tire diameter, and then divide that by the gear ratio times 336. So what we come up with is the RPM times tire diameter is 8,000 RPM times our tire diameter. Now we chose a 26-inch tall tire for our Bonneville car. And the reason for that, again, is we were trying to maximize gearing. Quite honestly, I would like to run a 25-inch tire on this thing, because what a 26-inch tall tire does, it gave us the gearing that we needed, but it made the ride height of the car too high. So I'd like to get the car lower so we can trim some off of you can see the tire's pretty tall, but if we made this a 25-inch tall tire, we could get rid of some of this air dam and bring the whole car lower to the ground. There's less form drag under the car, even though in this case we had a full belly pan. We had a belly pan in the front. We had a rear belly pan. We had a whole flat bottom basically under the car. But a 25-inch tall tire would get us lower to the ground, which would be way better at Bonneville. This was the compromise. This is what we had to do. So RPM times tire diameter divided by the gear ratio times 336. So what we have is 208,000 basically is our top number, 8,000 times 26. And then we divided that by 1,062, which was our 0.742 times 4.26, and then times 336. And that puts us at 8,000 RPM. That put us at 196 miles an hour at 8,000 RPM with that Integra GS LS non-VTEC transmission, just all stock. And with that gear ratio and that 26-inch tall tire at 8,000 RPM, that's 196 miles an hour. So I'm thinking, well, that's not enough. Now, there are two ways to go here, and we went both of them. the two ways to go to improve speed, because we wanted, like I said, we wanted to go more than 200 miles an hour in this car. And this transmission combination of final drive and fifth gear and at this RPM was not going to allow us the speed that we needed to do to set a record. We wanted to go over 200 and we wanted to set a record. So this wasn't going to allow us to do it. So what we can do is go more RPM. Now, I didn't want to go to 9,000 RPM because, in my opinion, more RPM makes the thing less reliable. We know these motors will run at 8,000 RPM because, having run B series Hondas in road racing, we run them for 24 hours and we'd shift at 8,000 RPM and they'll last forever. They'll last a 24-hour race. So we knew that there was no problem. I like to err on the conservative side. So we were trying to keep RPM down. As it turned out, we did go up in RPM. In fact, we went to 8,700, which is where this thing ended up running its maximum speed. But before doing that, we also did another thing. I had a custom final drive done. So we went from the 440 in the stock B16 trans to a 426 in the stock LS trans. And then I did another step down to a 4.0 final drive. We had the guys from Liberty Gear make us a final drive. And so we had a final drive of 4.0 put in. And what that allowed us to do was go up 13 miles an hour at 8,000 RPM. So now we're going 209 miles an hour, which is 26.13 miles an hour per 1,000 RPM. It's easy once you do that calculation. Then you can adjust for any change in RPM that you're going to do, which we did. So we went, and then I'm okay, 209 miles an hour. That puts us over 200. It actually put us over the record speed, which was good. But we had lots of power and we had more RPM to play with. So in our case, this thing ended up going through the lights at 8,700 RPM, which was 226 miles an hour and change. And that's exactly what the mile an hour showed on the timing lights at Bonneville. So we went more engine speed, a little more engine speed, changed the final drive. We did our 26-inch tall tire. The motor had plenty of power. Like I said, we always run it very conservative. We were in the low 11s in air fuel. We were only at 17 degrees of total timing. We were at about 16 or 17 pounds of boost. We had ice water. We had race gas. The thing was, it was well in its comfort zone running this. It's just that during the run, and this is the kind of thing that happens at Bonneville, an axle shaft popped out. This was a well-used, used Integra transmission. The half shafts that we used were from my B16 that had road raced umpteen times in the Motorola Cup, and also they're the axles that I used to win the U.S. Touring Car Championship in this Del Sol. And so they had seen lots and lots of miles. Obviously, they were never designed for the 500 horsepower or something that we were running to run this speed. And so the snap rings were kind of worn out, and the axle was the splines were worn out on the side. It just basically popped out of the transmission. I thought it blew the engine up, but it didn't. I was lucky. And we put a new one in, and then because we didn't break that in, because that's the other thing that we did with these axles is we made sure to break them in. I re-lubed them before each trip to Bonneville. We put zip ties around all the bellows so that they didn't expand at speed, because otherwise what happens is centrifugal force makes the bellows like grow and expand out. And when it grows out this way, it sucks it in and pulls it off of the boot and slings axle grease everywhere. And that's obviously not good. But because we had popped that axle out, we thought that the axle was bad. We went to the store while the car was in impound, bought a brand new axle shaft from Napa or wherever the auto parts store that was in the, had one in the town of Wendover, put that in and ran it. But what I didn't do, we did the zip ties on it to make sure that it didn't balloon out, but we didn't break the axle in. So it was a brand new axle. It had never been broken in, and it was cold in the morning, and we went out and asked the thing to run 227 miles an hour. And that axle actually popped out also, I think it did. So maybe we had a transmission issue in the gears and in the splines and the transmission also. But we were able to make our record run back up our record run in the morning and average this thing over 226 miles an hour. And with the right combination together with an axle that would stay in, this thing was going to go a lot faster because it was accelerating really hard even at this 4th mile mark. So it was going to go a lot faster. By the 5th mile, it would have still been going pretty fast. But we were able to do this because of all this calculations that I did beforehand, before we even took the car out. Because we knew that like I said, I don't want to run a million RPM, because guys had tried that. And everybody that I know that tried, oh yeah, we can run our Honda motor at 10,000 RPM. That's great. And guys do that in drag racing. But the more engine speed that you run, the more problems you have. And especially at Bonneville, when you're asking it to run for a minute or whatever at wide open throttle, it's hard on stuff. And so keeping it in this, what I would deem a very safe RPM range, that, we had springs, we had cams, and we had that kind of stuff in it. And it all worked out very well. But it worked out very well because we did our homework before we went out there. The other thing I want to mention, and this is definitely a consideration, less so on a front-wheel drive car than on a rear-wheel drive car, but the other thing to consider is tire slippage. So on a loose surface with an open differential, especially, most guys out at Bonneville experience tire slip. So you're not actually getting what the math stipulates here, because there's some slippage in the tire. They're trying to put traction down, so you don't actually get that the full circumference with each revolution, because some of it slipped. The slippage can vary from less than 1% in our case, because the math tracked almost exactly in our case. We had little or no tire slippage, and guys were having a hard time believing that. I'm like, look, here's the data logging. This shows that, in this gear calculation shows what is happening, and it tracks perfectly. So if we had 0.08 or 0.01% of tire slippage, because some guys are having 3 or 4 or even up to 10% tire slippage, because a lot of guys are having trouble putting power down anyway. But even when they're able to get the thing kind of hooked up, even going through the lights, they're getting a little bit of tire slip, a little bit of tire spin on this loose surface. So they don't ever get the mile an hour calculation to go with their tire size and gearing, because the slippage is taking some of that away. So something to consider. Less of a problem, like I said, on this front wheel drive car. We have the weight and the aero load over the drive tires. We don't have the back end trying to pass the front end. It just goes like a dart is supposed to, and not feathers first, like a lot of rear wheel drive cars go. So all of this worked out very well, but very, very simple math. So in our case, if you take like our first gear in our transmission was a 3.23, second gear was a 1.9, third gear was a 1.269, fourth gear was a 0.966. And if you multiply each of those times the 426 final drive, what you get at 8,000 RPM in first gear at 8,000 RPM, that's 45 miles an hour. At 8,000 RPM in second gear, that's 76 miles an hour. At 8,000 RPM in third gear, that's 114 miles an hour. At 8,000 RPM in fourth gear, that's 151 miles an hour. And then 196. This is all with a stock transmission. It's higher than that, obviously, with the gear set that we put in it. And then you can run more RPM. The reason at Bonneville that we're not interested in the lower gears is because we can't go wide open throttle in any of the gears except fourth gear. Otherwise, we'll get tire spin. So what we did was basically, I just ran the thing, not even in boost in any of these other gears. I think I was able to get into boost probably somewhere in third gear, but this is only part throttle. So all I'm doing while I'm making a run at Bonneville is just easing the car out to 8,000 RPM shift point, but like at part throttle, like at, less than a third throttle, just womp, womp, womp. And each time in each gear, I can go a little bit more throttle. I can go to, an eighth throttle, and then a fifth throttle, and then a third, and then, finally in fourth gear, at the very top of fourth gear, I can get wide open throttle with all the boost. And then in fifth gear, then that we can like go to wide open throttle with all the boost. But, and the important thing is, in this case, we're asking the thing to go from, in our case, 160 odd miles an hour in fourth gear when we do our shift to fifth. So we're asking the thing to go from 160 or so miles an hour to eventually 226 miles an hour. So that's a long pull. I mean, that's 60 plus miles an hour in one gear. It'd have been much better had I done a custom transmission where the split between third and fourth and fifth would have been much, much closer. And so that way we could have, while we're running part throttle, or an even taller final drive. But if I would have had the gearing split done the way that I would want to do a custom transmission, but I didn't have custom transmission kind of money, we just made do with what we had. It was wrecking yard stuff, basically, other than buying the final drive, which took a long time and was, I'm sure more money than I had to spend at the time, but it ended up working out. But if I could have got the gear splits for third, fourth, and fifth, we would have had really tall first and second gears because I'm only going part throttle on those. Like if we could have extended first gear out to 75 miles an hour and then second gear out to, 100 or 110 miles an hour and third gear out to 130 or 140 or 150, then we could have used more full throttle in the other gears, but had the gear split be less. So we would have dropped down from 8,000 down to only 7,000 or 6,500 or 6,800. So it had to do a shorter pull in these higher gears, but that's just on the wish list. Everything worked out and it had enough power to pull this. But if we can get more vehicle speed and more RPM earlier in the course, that means that we can run either more gear or more RPM and more mile an hour in the fourth and fifth mile on the course. All of this is stuff that you have to look at when you're trying to set these records. Obviously, also not using a junkyard transmission and axle shafts, also a good idea. Okay. Everything you do for top speed also works for fuel economy. Yeah, that's true. That's the thing about having lots of final drive and tall fourth and fifth or fifth gear or sixth gear. If you happen to have a 6-speed trans, that also works. So we'll get our pull doing. Have you ever adjusted final drive ratios on your street or track car or truck? You could do it on a truck too. A lot of times when you do on the truck guys, when they do, giant sized tires, you have to change the final drive so that you could get it back in line with what it was with the smaller tires. So let me know if you guys have ever played with final drives and stuff. I guess gear vendors on my front wheel drive would have been good enough. Scott, you have a 1.7 to 1 final drive. That would be a lot. All the cool kids are here, and Richard. I think I found valve springs for 8,000 RPM. That shouldn't be too hard. There are lots of dual valve springs that you can run. If you look at the Honda stuff, easy for 8. I mean, a factory valve spring will go to 8,000 RPM on the Honda stuff. Building 81 Trans Am, M21 4-speed, 241 gear. There you go. 60, 78, 75. Wondering how it will drive with those super tall gears, wrong transmission, and gobs of torque. It will definitely load the trans. So, it'll definitely load the turbo. So it will be good. That's a lot of gear though. But an M21 is going to be a 1-to-1 fourth gear though. How much do the tires grow at what kind of speed does it change the calculation? There's almost no tire growth on ours. They have lots of tire growth on the rear tires on a top fuel car from RPM, but that tire is very soft and very spongy for traction, but it also allows a bunch of deformation at tire speed. and they want that thing to grow. They want it to hook as it leaves, and they want the tire to grow because that's also part of their top speed calculation for the tire, for the gearing on the top fuel car. And now that this was done way back, so now they actually have more individual gears to choose from, and even custom gear sets. Although I have to say, the custom gear sets for most of the guys are usually done for road racing or drag racing. So they're more like 513 final drives and really close gear sets, which helps. But I want them to be really close, but also really tall. But that's not the way most of the people were doing them for high RPM Honda applications. Admiral, you're just gonna put 273s in it and take it to Bonneville. That would be good. It's a little more difficult with a Mustang or a Camaro or something out there. Transmission you think will be ideal for a 2001 Chevy 5.3 22 lift and 44s with a 513 came stock with a 4L60? People are just going to tell you to run a 4L80. What I've been thinking about is I would like a truck. So I'm kind of wanting the Rampage with a 2.2 or 2.5 turbo in it. But if I had a full size truck like I have, I would much rather have a manual transmission in it. So I'd like to find an older 4.8 truck that came with a manual trans. I don't know how the manual trans conversion would be for this thing. I don't think I would do it to this truck. I think I would do it to although I do like having the extra space in the back. But I have a T56 transmission that I could put in it, which would be good. Turbo Toaster, with what you know now, if you're going to go back and build a front wheel drive, what would you do differently? I probably, and what I'm going to do, because I am going to go back out there, I'm not for the 250 to 300 mile an hour deal, but I want to go 200 in something much smaller. But I'll do it in a K series more than likely, because a K series has more RPM potential and it has just more head flow and it has more of everything. So I probably, and it has a 6-speed trans. And there are gear sets for the 6-speed stuff. So I probably would do a K series instead. And if I wanted to go more than this car went, the difference between 250 and 300 is orders of magnitude in terms of power and prep. So that would be very, very difficult, because it would be hard to make the 1500 horsepower that you'd have to make to go 300 miles an hour, because every 25% increase in top speed requires 100% increase in power. So you start doing the math there, and it's a lot. I wonder if it'd be worth it to get a custom 1-2 gear set for my 4R60. What is the 1-2 gear set like? What are you concerned with in first gear? Sykes, what's up? Those 20s, no, the 10s, but I keep them clean. Did you use a Weissman transmission for your custom gears? No, I use Liberty Gear. They did the final drive for it. And I'm familiar with Weissman. They do lots of cool stuff. Bear, 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 bear. When it goes to Bonneville salt flats, just remember not all the salt can be driven on to attract people out. Yeah, don't go off of the beaten path. You'll see because there'll be really really deep tracks in there. I'm talking even 4-wheel drive stuff goes out there and gets stuck all the time. What they do is stay over in the safety of the area where they have traction, and they just run cables out to drag people out. Because underneath the salt, the layer of salt, it'd be like driving on this much snow, and then under that is all just water and bog and mud because it's a lake. Underneath there is the lake. Switched from a 338 to a 360 final drive in my BMW and got better quarter mile times. Yeah, gearing helps that. Mike, you're building all-wheel drive dirt bikes? Explain. Taj voted yes because 3000 GT VR4 6-speed rear matches the DSM all-wheel drive auto ratios. Cool. Are the things interchangeable? Are the gear sets interchangeable? Or the final drives? Lots of gear swaps in my off-roading. I did lots of rear end gear changes in all kinds of stuff when I was doing the Silver State in my Mustang. We went from the 308s that came stock with it. We tried 273s. We tried 241s. I tried 327s. I tried all kinds of stuff. Turbo Sentra, do you have a T5 in? Oh, a turbo 350? 120 miles an hour. I need your we need your tire size on that. Head flow, I set my turbo LS with a turbo 400, 273 gears. It's a good highway flyer deal. So it would be highway friendly, 26 or 28 inch tall tire. A test and tune. I saw a Honda Insight that runs 9s. Yeah, a K swapped Insight. Those are very aero, and that's a really good car to take to Bonneville. Got a 416 stroker. My Yukon 411 gears, good off the line, but terrible on the highway. That's the nice thing about a multi-speed transmission. Also, is you can get all of that. Argentina's in the house. Let's see, 456 on 29.5 inch tall tires. The Insight had a J Series V6. Yeah, the big block. Admiral, what is third gear in that? And what is the tire size that you're calculating there? .323 gears allow you to drag and cruise and top end of the Pontiac V8 at 7,000 RPM. What transmission is that? Overdrive 4L80, only GM worthy, auto top end. Daniel, 411 gears in your 70 Mach 1. I like those cars. All right, Cam, go do your meeting, man. Just watch the intercooler video. Very informative. Question: best place to measure charge temperature just before the throttle opening. Yeah, you want to measure the important thing is what the charge temperature is in the intake manifold. I wish the stock Honda automatic transmissions could be improved to a decent limit. I'm getting too old to shift all the time. Yeah, I'm not a fan of the Honda automatics. So B&R doing the math on your C2500 pickup. Work for Christina all-wheel drive. We build dirt bikes and fat tires. But you're saying that you build all-wheel drive dirt bikes? Are you driving? I'm assuming that there's two of them, unless it's a quad. But are you driving the front tires also? How much boost could an 84 Corvette 2-bolt main hold? It depends on the tune. And if you have an 84 Corvette, you have a crossfire injection. So you're going to have trouble getting fuel to it. That's going to be your problem, not the amount of boost that you can take. I got a T5 to put in the BMW. T5 uses a slip yoke. Slip yoke. It's all yoked. More simple to change final drive on two wheels. Just change some sprockets. Also, you can change the tire size. Weissman will make custom gears a fair price for most transmissions. Use a T56 Magnum. You can make 600 horsepower with that 84 Corvette motor. You're going to need probably better heads on it, and definitely a cam and springs. And then if you did a blow through carburetor on it, and not that cross ram fuel injection, which I think is cool, but you're going to have trouble getting enough fuel to it. But the bottom end of the motor will do 600 as long as you put ring gap in it. 1963 Pontiac Grand Prix 455, 323 years. I'm going to go to live chat. Live. It's all the way live. Man, look at you. Tesla's just climbing up there. Climbing. Pontiacs, especially 455s, do not want nor need much gear. Yeah, the gear that you put in is going to be a function of where your engine is making power, and then the RPM range that you want to run. That's why we used 8,000 for the little Honda motor, but you wouldn't use that for most Pontiacs. Unless you build the motor to run that engine speed. But like I said, RPM, expense, and reliability. 60s Grand Prix are good. I like the 70s ones too. Mike, they are, so it does drive the front and back tire. That's cool. So you get that good street launch. So you need an adapter to link an LS motor to a monthly 4-speed. No, the bell housing will do that. Our splayed main caps working on an old 84 vet block. No, I wouldn't go to the expense of doing that. I would just go get another motor that is a 4-bolt cap. MTB, I don't think you should have trouble inverting the throttle body. Yep, BNR, the gearing that you use is function of the RPM range of the motor. Underdog, he races a 455 that makes 1100 horsepower on the motor. Runs billet blocks. What heads is he using to make 1100? And what size motors are those? I doubt that they're 455s anymore. They're probably lots bigger than that, right? Probably biggins. Still trying to shoehorn a 5.3 twin turbo into an 80 Love truck. Seems like a good idea at the time. Limited real estate there. So what do those high port heads flow? Do they flow 500? Went from 32-inch tires to 35s on the Jeep. Changed gears from 373 to 488. Back to responsive throttle. It does make a difference. TIC Performance has a bow tie block 350 Chevy, which holds the stick shift world record. So is a small block still worth building? You can make power out of any kind of engine combination that you want. So you just decide which one you like. There's not one that's better than the other and has eliminated the need to make everything else insignificant. That's not true. There's lots of people making lots of power with small blocks and big blocks and small blocks and big block Fords and 4200s and Nissans and Toyotas and all of it you can make lots of power with. Forgot to mention my Mach 1 has a modified C4 3-speed, 3500 stall, 27-inch tire. The Cleveland is using former Pro Stock high port iron heads. Do those heads have the sectioned exhaust mod on them? And are they posted also in the inside the head? Uh, 330 CFM is not enough to make 1100 horsepower unless you're running boost. So are those the flow rates of the ones that you're talking about? The high ports start at 330. They can be ported a lot more. Well, they'd have to be to make 1100 horsepower. Now it's 1400 horsepower all motor. That's a lot of head flow to make that kind of power. The No Name Nationals. The no namers. Going to the No Name Nationals this year. Missed last year because of a bad transmission in my truck. BNR. That's where I was thinking the head had to be to make the kind of power that people were talking about. A long ways from 330 CFM. I'm a Pontiac owner. I have a Pontiac 350. Will a girdle help a small block Chevy 2-bolt with high RPM? What is it you're trying? Why don't you just tell us what you're trying to do with it? How much power are you trying to make? What kind of power do you need to make to do the thing that you need to do? And they've done testing on the Dodge 4-cylinder turbo. I haven't really done much. I haven't got to do it yet, but I've done 2.3 turbo stuff on the chassis dyno way back, but not on the engine dyno. Thumper Warp 6 heads are a near copy of Oldsmobile Pro Stock heads on Big Block Chevy. I think the guys at West Tech have a couple of old Pro Stock motors there. I don't know if theirs or if they have Oldsmobile ones on there, or if they're the Pontiac ones. Richard, I'd like to do that too. I don't know what it takes to wire that and run it and stuff. It's always very, very difficult and time consuming trying to get a new motor up and running on the engine dyno. So if you're just trying to make 500 horsepower, that's pretty easy to do with boost. That is a very mild cam and springs and ring gap and a blow through carburetor and a small turbo. That's really, really easy to do. You don't need RPM. You can make 500 horsepower with boost under 6,000 RPM, under 5,500 RPM probably. Pontiac Big Block Chevys are the Big Chief heads. Mitsubishi Mighty Max that weighed 2,500, swapping a 4G63 turbo in it using an. I don't know about that transmission, but the 4G63 is good. I think recently the coolest motor is the Trophy 4-cylinder, although we didn't get to make any power on it. And I'm excited about the 2.2 Dodge also. And then the 2.5. Yes, the exhaust side of the 351 4V was milled off and replaced with the aluminum bar. Yeah, the pins are used to stabilize the intake valve seats like Glidden. Yeah, they also did that when they ran them in cup also, so that the heads would last long enough. Hot mess. What are you trying to find that's 14 or 15 inches? Are you talking about tire size? Do 99 to '07 Silverado V6 and V8s have the same springs? Are you talking about the suspension coil springs? Or are you talking about valve springs? What springs do we need? Are you going down yet? Not really. 67% are saying, have you ever adjusted final drive ratios on your street or track car or truck? 67% are saying yes. Richard trying to find a pair of old 245 or 225 60 15s. Yeah, that'd be a lot more common in a 16. Because that would be like the old Corvette tires. Or in the case of a 245, it would be an IROC tire. RPM equals some kind of mess. If you just use the formula that I did, it's much easier. I don't know. I wouldn't imagine. Does anybody know? I wouldn't imagine a V6 coil spring on a truck is going to be the same as a V8 coil spring. I would think that it would be lighter, but maybe if it has the same like off-road package or whatever, that they might be the same. Richard, so back to top speed when it comes to overall, where does the limit happen for the motor versus aero? Well, top speed is all about aero versus horsepower output. It's not torque, although there is a torque number associated with that. So you want your mile an hour, ideally, you want your peak speed to come at the peak horsepower of the RPM range. In our case, on our turbo Honda, we were making essentially the same power, the same peak power for a pretty broad range because it just went up and kind of was flat for quite a while, which is both good and bad. If it continued to climb, maybe you could, continue to make more speed. But in our case, it was good because we were making more power than we needed to accelerate to get out to where the thing was. We didn't ever run out of, in our case, when we were running the Civic, we ran out of axle. We didn't run out of power. We had more mile an hour to go at that power level. And then with more boost, we had a lot more power. Yeah, Thumper, that's the one that I gave him. That mile an hour calculation is really accurate. And it's easy to use. Richard, the Camaro has 6 old Krager SSs. Nice. 14 7s and 2 15 by 8s. That's what was on the Nova also. Well, it is an all-motor LS build that will beat a Scat Pack. What's the Scat Pack? 485 or something? So figure the way that we run that is going to be low to mid 500s. So there's lots of 6-liter builds that will that will make more power than that stock motor. Did you test the Civic somewhere before Bonneville? Yes, several times. DC, you want 2-inch headers for your Windsor? What kind of power output is your Windsor motor making to need 2-inch headers? 495. Yeah, so it's going to be the way that we run it on the engine dyno when it's optimized. It's going to be mid 500s, and a 6-liter that's pretty easy to do. Ram truck, that might be close enough, although look at the tire size that went along with those respective gearings and see unless you've changed it. And the other thing that's important to do is if you're using the calculation for mile per hour times or RPM times tire diameter, you have to measure you actually have to measure and calculate the tire diameter. So we run a 26-inch tall tire, but you have to do the diameter of it. And the circumference of your tire is pi times diameter. Area equals pi squared, right? Yeah, and then circumference is pi times diameter. So I didn't put that in my calculation discussion. What LS motor can make 800 horsepower NA? There's lots of them. That 495 that I built made more than 800 horsepower. I have videos up on making oh no, the tire diameter is the tire diameter. I'm trying to do more calculations. What was my question here? Oh, the 800 horsepower. That's not, it's fairly expensive to do NA. I had to do it with a big stroker combination. There are guys making 1,000 horsepower or more because there are cylinder heads that will support that. So you just have to get the right combination of displacement, and if you have that kind of head flow, it's the right camshaft and displacement, and compression ratio and intake manifold and stuff. So all of that's possible, but it's not cheap. It's a lot easier. It's a lot less expensive to make 800 horsepower with a junkyard 5.3 and a turbo. What, if any, body mods were permitted in your Bonneville Civic? Did you see this thing? Did you see the body mods? It had a full belly pan in one of the classes that we ran it in. It has a rear wing. It has all of this is blocked off. It has an air dam. It had, like I said, it had a full belly pan and stuff. The mirrors were gone. We put little plates on them and stuff. So that was in blown gas comp coupe. We also ran blown gas, and we also ran blown fuel, but blown fuel altered, which altered was fewer modifications. Sykes, there's almost no deformation in the tire when you're running 65 psi in the tire, which is what we're doing. Richard, the belly pan was from bumper to bumper. Yeah, we made a full belly pan that bolted on underneath the bottom side of the car. Then we had another one that attached to it in the rear. And then we also had a front one. I have a CRX SI. Very, very cool. What year is it? Building the motor currently, single cam life. Suppose my tires are way taller than the program. So you have to multiply that out and see what the actual change in speed for every revolution is with that gearing. Is there a record for a single cylinder four-wheel car? They're based on displacement. It has nothing to do with the number of cylinders. Richard, were you running a rear diffuser? No, we didn't build a diffuser out of it. At Bonneville, you actually want to fill the low pressure area back behind the car. You don't want to generate downforce. You don't want any angle in the wing. In fact, it's usually better to have it not even be straight, to have it be downward. 1990 CRX SI, very cool. Richard, how is the car handling at 150 plus? It was dead stable at 226. It doesn't want to lift. That Civic body is very, very good. And even a stock Civic at 150 without all that stuff on it, which I drove that car at that speed many times. That Civic's really nice. The sloped rear window helps that a lot. The car that was really bad at speed at 150 was the S2000, because of the way that the hood and the trunk area is shaped. It wants to lift because it has lots of turbulence in a low pressure area back at the trunk, and it wants to raise the back up. Traction must be a problem at some point. Traction's not a problem on the front wheel drive car. A hot mess. Which car is heavy? The Civic. We want at Bonneville for the car to be heavy. We don't really care about weight. Weight isn't an issue at Bonneville. At Bonneville, it's all aerodynamics and versus power and gearing. In fact, most guys add lots and lots of weight. The rear wheel drive cars add thousands of pounds to it so that they can put traction down. Ram truck, why do your old cylinder head bolts have oil on them? Where did the oil come from? Did the oil come from when you were moving them and there was oil in the cylinder head and it went down into the hole when you were doing it, which is more likely the cause? It would be very hard for oil to get down in that hole unless it was there when you put the bolts in or it got there when you pulled the bolt out. You won't have oil coming up through the hole. If anything, they'll go into water. Getaway, a Civic Coupe would be way better than a hatchback. A hatchback is a lot shorter. The longer the car is, the better. Was the center of gravity on the car consideration? No, not for our car. It wasn't. But it can be so that you can see if you have a car that's spinny, you can see where it wants to rotate. Yeah, so Ram truck, when you're putting them back in, what we do is put a rag and an air nozzle, and we use a long nozzle that goes all the way down to the bottom of that hole, and then we'll blow all the oil out, and then spray because then we'll spray brake clean or something in there and keep blowing it out. Depending on what your factory service manual says, and what your torque spec is, whether or not you just put a little bit of oil on the bolt when you're torquing it. You can RTV the new head bolts, but if you do that, does your factory bolt require oil on there? And the RTV is not going to stop oil from draining back in there once you take the bolt out. I don't know what a measurement on ground clearance. The ground clearance that we are running on the front air dam is kind of the critical thing, because there's compression at speed based on the load on the hood, and you don't want the air dam to drag. So we just would make it as low as possible and then trim it if we saw that the thing was plowing, and you just trim it to where that's not happening. A big block Chevy Malibu wagon would be fun out on the salt. No, I completely disagree with that. This Civic had a full belly pan on it. Yeah, it was flat. Super stretch limousine. What you want is something low and long and something that tapers at the back. If you can envision a long, slender raindrop, that's what you want. And if you can also make it very narrow and pencil shaped, that would be even better. .351 Windsor SVO block, 2-bolt main, 408, 60 over, long tube headers won't fit, and I can't find them. Does it, like, how much power is that thing making? Do you have a big cam in it and good cylinder heads and all that stuff? Yeah, a thumper, a big square front end on those GTOs, and then an F body would be a lot better. Sidewinder missile, yep. A torpedo, although a torpedo is a lot more blunt nose than you'd want it to be. Pointy would be better. Yes, the Javelin. Yeah, the pointy thing, not the car. For anywhere but Bonneville, I would pick a hatchback Civic just because I like them. But for Bonneville, the coupe is definitely the way to go. Although I had friends that, in fact, the guy that bought this car set records in a hatch with a, he had a K series in it, but he had a B series in it before. And the NA B series made good power. It made 240 something at the tire, which was really good. Is there a slowdown procedure? Yeah, a lot of times before I learned how to pack parachutes, we didn't use the chute because we didn't know how to repack it, or we had to go ask somebody else to repack it. Once we saw how easy it was, I'm like, why weren't we doing this the whole time? But especially if you're going that fast, they want you to pull the chute to slow down. So you just pull the chute, and it makes the thing go nice and straight and stuff. If you've done your homework on where the chute attaches to the car, so that it doesn't, lift the car up or pull the car down to lift the nose up. If it's nice and straight, it just slows the car down. You pull off to the side, and which side you go to is very important. During the driver's meeting, they'll tell you, okay, if everything's okay, you go this way. If you're having a problem, go that way, and we'll stop and we'll rush the ambulance out if you're having a heart attack or your car's on fire or whatever. But yeah, you just pull off to the side toward the return road, basically, and then your guys will already be roaring down the turn road. And they will have taken off behind you basically on the course and go out to the turn road, and then they'll come and pick you up and hook you up and drag you back. And on the slowdown procedure for me, yeah, we kind of ease off the throttle, and so that we don't upset the car while it's going fast. And then the parachute is much better than using the brakes, because as you can imagine, having never used the brakes this whole time, and now you're going 200 plus miles an hour, to try to go on the brakes immediately, all you'll do is just warp the rotors. The belly pan rake would come from the attitude of the car, but that's less of a concern because we're not allowing very much airflow under the car. We have the air dam basically all the way down. Richard long and slender and teardrop shape is getting into serious land speed at that point and taking the fun out of just going 200. Well, the cool thing would be to make the car so aero that, like for me, the challenge would be to go 200 at the least amount of power. That would be cool. Like build a streamliner that will go 200 with like 100 horsepower. Could you do something like that? That would be kind of cool. What's the best intake for a 408? Is it a 408 Ford we were talking about, or if it's a 408 Ford, the one that I think I would try if you have room is the high ram. That's probably really good. Yeah, every car guy should go out and just go watch fast cars run at Bonneville. It's kind of cool. Yeah, when the axle broke on the Civic, that was pretty exciting. But the parachute stabilized stuff because the car at about the 3 mile mark, and I had to make it to the 4th mile mark at the 3 mile mark because when the axle shaft popped out the first time, the car just lost power. And so I'm like, oh, okay, great. We just hurt the motor, but it didn't break or didn't do anything. It's kind of contained in the strut, but when I could feel it going bad on the return run in the morning, the record run where we, because you have to back that up. So at about the 3 mile mark, the car started pulling really hard to the right. So I had to put opposite lock, and I'm like, I'm making it to the, we're getting that record. I'm making it to the 4th mile, whatever happens. And then right as we crossed the 4th mile mark, the thing like pulled real hard to poured again real hard to the right side away from my counter steer. And then I'm like, okay, I'm just kind of, you can't, at first I'm a road race guy. So I'm like, I'm trying to catch it. And the car's like, you're being dumb. You need to do the right thing now. And so you just pull the chute and it straightens it out and goes, oh, hey, look, everything's okay. But from a road race background, taking your hands off the wheel, which you need to do because this thing the wheel will go crazy and break your thumbs. Because the car is going like this back and forth. The parachute brings it back in line where the wavering, gets less and less. So taking your hands off the wheel and pulling a parachute is counterintuitive to what we had taught and were taught when we're learning how to road race. I had to chute lift the back end up. Yeah, that's not good. Or the bad thing is I've seen guys spin, like pull a chute, but they were spinning and then they go through the chute backwards. It's bad. Gets all wrapped up and stuff. And then the chute's like, well, I tried to do my thing. Oh, an LS 408. Well, take a look at I don't know what heads you have on it, but take a look at all of the intake manifold videos I have up, and I'll show you kind of where you want to make power. At that point, Bonneville wouldn't be long enough to hit 200 with 100 horsepower. I don't know if it would be an acceleration problem. It might be at that distance. Way back there's a C4 Corvette ZR1 racer. Had salt flat tires all around, just 5-inch wide rubber to the ground. That's you want as little tire on there as possible. There was a guy that I think it was a mirror from Spectra. brought his F40 out there several times, which is very, very cool. Although I wouldn't do that to my F40, but I salute people that have that kind of money. Burns, he's right. Hot Mess is right. There may not be enough distance to accelerate a car where we could get like having the car be able to go that speed at that with that much power because of the limited aero drag. Then weight actually becomes a very critical element. And being with only that limited amount of power, even if we could go that speed, I don't know that that's possible, whatever the number is, but it might not have enough to accelerate it up to that top speed in that 5 mile mark. And also there would be another hurdle to overcome. You'd have to get up to 175 miles an hour in the 3 mile course before they'll let you run the 5 mile course. So you'd have your work cut out for you. I mean, the easy way to do it would be to have an extra 100 shot of nitrous to get you up to speed, and then only do it with 100 miles an hour or the 100 horsepower thing. Are push cars permitted? Yeah, they're done all the time. Yeah, there are some push cars that push these things up to 100 miles an hour because a lot of these cars have really tall gears in them, and like 4-speed transmissions, and they're real cantankerous motors, and they don't idle well. That's why people were looking at the Civic. We're sitting there letting the car idle. They're like, "What is that? Is it like a stock Civic?" I'm like, "No, it's actually." And then we would meet them in the staging lane again. We're waiting to run again. They're like, "That thing went really fast." I'm like, "Yeah." They said, but it idles so nice. I'm like, "Yeah, I could have easily driven it here, and it would have gotten 30 or 35 miles per gallon driving here, I'm sure, because that's what these little turbo motors do. They make lots of power, and they're not cantankerous like all of these things." Sugar Dove, 600 horsepower is enough to go 200 in a Boss 302. Ram truck, I would be leery of cheap cylinder head bolts. That's one area that I spend money on. You could use stock ones. For the turbo, Matt's done it a lot over at Sloppy, but I like putting ARP stuff. All these motors and project cars. Do you own a stage unit complex? No. Oh, I have storage units. Yeah, I have 2 of them down at West Tech, or down near West Tech. Yeah, cheap head bolts not really a good idea. I've felt some that are like when they get really spongy and they start stretching, you're like, "Oh yeah, that's getting ready to break." You can envision the thing just elongating and getting thinner and thinner. And I have to admit, like in the Honda stuff, I've reused Honda bolts a lot. And I've reused LS bolts a lot too, but usually on NA motors. Yeah, you just tighten until it stretches, then back it off half a turn, right? Okay, guys, time to go. I've been here a long time, but I will be back tonight. Hope you guys all have a good day. Thank you for showing up, and I will see you guys later. The CA625s, yeah, those are good ones. That's what we used on the Big Bang motor. Big